An 18-year-old boy with exceptional talent in a skilled field lives in a relatively peaceful town off in a sleepy corner of the world surrounded by green. He has two very close friends, a boy and a girl about his age, as well as a mentor figure who's a bit older man who likes to wear long flowing clothes to match his long flowing hair. One day though, the peace of the village will be rudely interrupted by the invasion of a mechanized force, and in trying to fend it off, that boy will awaken an incredible power and set out on a journey that will reshape the world for good. If you just pay attention to the broad strokes, this could easily sound like the setup to hundreds, if not thousands of plots, but if you pay attention to the specifics, then you could see that this not only very accurately describes the beginning of Xenoblade Chronicles 1, but also that of Xenogears. Yes, I've finally been able to start playing through Xenogears. I've been loving it so far, but the big thing for me is I wanted to start making content about it, and that's a bit hard to do because a lot of the stuff that would be of huge interest to the Xenoblade fans who watch me is big endgame spoiler-related stuff, and I don't want to rush through the game or just read some spoilers and talk about that only having played the beginning of the game. But then I realized that there are a lot of parallels, intentional or otherwise, this could just be a huge coincidence, between the beginning, I'd say, hour and a half of Xenogears and the Colony 9 arc, or about the first 3 hours of Xenoblade Chronicles 1. So I figured, why not do a little compare and contrast piece of them? This is just a comparison of the opening acts of Xenogears and Xenoblade 1. I'm not trying to criticize either of them or determine which one is better or make some objective analysis, just to see how they have a lot of points in common, and also talk about the differences when they do show up. I'm not going to be spoiling anything beyond the openings of both games, so really since this is just the setup for an epic RPG in both cases, a couple hours into the game doesn't really count as spoiler territory at all, so feel free to go into this completely blind and not worry about anything, because yes, there are a lot of revelations later on in both plots that provide context and further explain things that happen, but I'm going to be treating these openings as a vacuum, so nothing from later in the game or elsewhere in the series will be taken into account here, intentionally. So don't comment otherwise. That's gonna be very annoying if you do that, so don't. I will be ignoring Xenoblade's Battle of Sword Valley segment because there's no real comparison in Gears there. While its opening cutscene does take place in the past, it's on a much different timescale than 1 year ago, and the real comparisons only start picking up once focus shifts to the actual protagonist, Shulk in Xenoblade and Faye in Xenogears. The first big thing is that both protagonists are 18-year-old boys, which I mentioned before, and they're also highly skilled in something. Shulk is a great weapons developer, which is evident by the fact that he has his own lab in the Colony 9 weapon development thing at 18. That's kind of unheard of, and would probably be the modern-day equivalent of definitely getting an early PhD. Like, you wouldn't be able to get that sort of position in industry at 18, no matter what you did in the real world, so that's kind of ridiculous. Art is a bit more free-form in its hierarchy, but Faye does seem to be very, very good at it, and he's also a master martial artist at 18, which is kind of evident the instant you start fighting as him, but he also teaches that to the children of Lahan Village where he lives, so that's a bit of a thing too. But the point still stands that when you first see him, Faye is painting, and when you first see him, Shulk is looking for mechon parts to make into weapons. After meeting our hero in a somewhat defining introductory scene, we're then introduced to the town and have the ability to wander around and do favors for people. This is where you start talking to people and learn a bit more about the character you're controlling by other people's reactions to them, or things they say. You also meet the other two members of your little trio. You get Timothy and Alice in Gears, then of course Ryan and Fiora in Blade, and you also do get to do favors for people. There's a bit of very early side questing. In Gears, you haven't gotten a combat tutorial, and the game styles are very different, so it's a lot of very minor stuff. You could do a couple favors for people, answer some questions, and just have a couple in-depth conversations. And then there's also the rock, paper, scissors guy, which gets you a permanently missable key item, which it's apparently thought of as a very difficult and annoying thing to do every time if you want 100% the game, but I beat him, like, on try 3, so it wasn't too big a deal. But anyway, because the games are very different in style, not only being a decade apart, but also being very different types of JRPG, the actual type of favors differ. It's exactly what you'd expect from PS1 JRPG in Gears, but Blade actually has you going out exploring the wild-ish area nearby Colony 9, finding items and killing monsters. So you get that kind of thing. But that's also something that makes a bit more sense because Blade's opening is about twice as long as Gears, so there's more stuff to do before you start progressing the plot. After that, your first real introduction to combat comes in the form of a fetch quest that sends you through a first formal dungeon in the form of a very rocky area. In Xenogears, Alice asks Faye to go get a camera because she wants to take pictures at her wedding with Timothy, which is tomorrow, and is totally not an enormous red flag that something very bad is going to happen to at least some of the characters before that comes to pass. But anyway, Faye heads up the mountain near Lahan Village to go meet with the guy who lives on top. One Dr. Citan Uzuki, who is his friend and somewhat of a mentor figure, and yes, he started the archetype that eventually became Dunban in Xenoblade, so they are literally equivalent characters to each other. I'm not just pulling things out of my ass. Anyway, in addition to being a doctor, Citan is also a bit of a tinkerer with a bunch of ancient tech and stuff, and he just kind of has a camera, so Faye heads up, meets him, talks to him, they have a bit of a chat. Citan agrees to bring the camera down himself tomorrow because he doesn't trust it in Faye's meaty hands or something like that. And so Faye, since he's already up there, spends dinner with the doctor, his wife and daughter, and then heads back home. Meanwhile, in the other universe, Shulk, Ryan, and Fiora are all carrying out Ryan's punishment detail from the Defense Force, which is to go through Tephra Cave and retrieve some ether cylinders from the ether hangar. You go through the cave, you have a boss fight, and that's basically where the next plot beat picks up. Now, there's a reason why I said your real introduction to combat and not your introduction in general, because while yes, this is most likely the first time you're going to fight anything in Gears, in Blade, you have had the option to walk around and fight monsters for pretty much the entire time, but when Fiora joins you at the beginning of Tephra Cave, which brings your party to 3 for the first time since Shulk was introduced, you gain the party gauge, which allows you to revive down party members and perform chain attacks, and basically adds the final layer of complexity to the battle system prior to Shulk getting the Monado. So this is where it truly opens up and lets you experiment with almost everything the game has to offer. Again, on the Gears side, this is your first battle in general, unless you kind of walked out of the village to the overworld, walked around because there weren't any other areas you could actually go to at the time and just kind of fought something. But still, this is probably when you'd actually learn how the ATB system, the AP system, all your chi stuff, how all that works. Then, when overlooking the town, the enemy strikes. In Xenogears, a large group of gears land near and start attacking Lahan Village, and in Blade, the Mechon come and attack Colony 9. This attack also heavily involves the mentor figure. On his way down from the mountain, Faye sees the attack and Citan comes down, and they agree that they're going to try to help in however they can together. So they start running down the mountain together. Meanwhile, when the Xenoblade party starts fending off the Mechon in the attack, Dunban shows up with the Monado, obviously is the only one who has a real measure of success fighting them, and well, there you go, that's where he's involved. Next, in an attempt to protect their hometown, the hero takes control of a powerful weapon that they realistically shouldn't be able to use and that the mentor figure advises them not to touch, but are able to use it flawlessly, which leads into a fight or group of fights that have the introduction of that game's combat gimmick. Now, I don't say gimmick in a negative light here at all, I just mean something specific to that game that no other or few other games, let alone in the series, have. Both are the first game in a series. Of course, Xenogears is the only one in its series, but it's also the first Xeno game as a whole, and Xenoblade is the first Xenoblade game, but there is a bigger context in both cases that you can use to figure out what the gimmick of each game actually is. Xenogears was released in between Final Fantasy VII and VIII, developed by the same studio, and originally conceived as 7, so all of those and similar PS1-era active time battle RPGs are the context. The big thing Gears had to show beyond the AP system for using irregular attacks was, of course, Gears themselves. You get to fight in mechs. So there you go. And this is demonstrated when Faye boards his gear Veltal for the first time, and fights in it, and that's where you get your tutorial in gear combat. In Xenoblade, the gimmick's a bit interesting because at the time of its release, its gimmick was its battle system and game style, which were relatively unseen in the genre up until then, but later on, retroactively, in the context of later Xenoblade games, visions and the Monado art type stuff are definitely the gimmick of this game, and of course, they're introduced when Shulk picks up the Monado for the first time and is, well, able to actually use them in plot. Then, after that tutorial fight, one of the trio dies as a result of the boss of the enemy forces. This then causes the protagonist to go into a rage. The deaths are pretty much equally violent, but this is where the massive tonal difference between the games is shown. Metalface stabs Fiora after she ineffectively tries to take him down, and this causes Shulk to just get very, very angry, attack Metalface. You get into a hopeless boss fight that there's no way of winning, the entire party gets curb stomped, and the Mechon escape, leaving Shulk to set out into the world following them on a revenge quest. Once the heroes showed up, a lot less people died. They successfully defended Colony 9 for the most part, and Shulk isn't leaving to go do future defensive things, he's leaving because he wants revenge on Metalface for killing Fiora. Meanwhile, in Xenogears, Timothy gets gunned down by enemy gears, and Faye gets very, very angry, and understandably so. But something mysterious and unknown at this point in the game happens to Faye in his heightened emotional state, and he ends up completely blacking out. But there's an FMV of the scene, and we see a very, very big explosion. When he comes to, it's revealed that he somehow triggered that explosion with Veltal, and he wiped Lahan Village off the map, and killed the majority of the people. Faye sets out on his journey as an exile because he accidentally nuked his own village, killing more people than the actual enemy attack did. And yes, Xenogears gets even darker from then on. After this point, the games do diverge a lot more right after, but it is interesting to see how much they do mirror each other in the beginning, and this might not have even been intentional. It could have been a subconscious thing on Takahashi's part. With that though, this video is done. This is my first sort of actual Xenogears video, so I hope you enjoyed. I hope people who don't know what a Xenogears is also enjoyed. And yeah, I would like to thank my patrons, of course, but this is going to be the last time I'm doing that because after today, I am changing up my Patreon method. There'll be a small update video about that soon. But basically, I'm removing some rewards and changing tiers so $1 a month will get you everything. It's basically a pay-what-you-want tip jar, and stuff will be released publicly, basically a month after it's first uploaded to patrons. Speaking of patrons though, for the last time in words, I would like to thank Satsu Ryokoi, Lily Starflame, Dead Pat, Zero, Jankles, as well as Barracks, whose fanfiction.net page you can find in the description as a patron promotion thing. So yes, thank all of you, especially the people whose names I just said. You are pretty much the reason this video exists as soon, because if it wasn't for patron money, I wouldn't be playing Xenogears right now. And also, I have talked a lot about a second channel, and my original plan was literally to hold off on the second channel until I got a new profile picture and banner for this one, so I could put the Finch one I have now on the second channel. But those are in no way going to be done in time for that to happen, because I want to do reactions to the Pokemon Direct and E3. So the Pokemon Direct reaction is going to be the first video on that second channel, and later on, after E3 probably, I'm going to start making Let's Plays. I'm going to start streaming Golden Sun. Those are going to go up there, and I'm also going to upload the raw gameplay files of my Xenogears playthrough. I did not do a commentated Let's Play on it because I thought it would spoil my first experience with the game, and I'm not going to do that for Xenosaga either, but there is a very distinct lack of high-quality Xenogears footage on the internet, so I figured I'll still upload it to my second channel, not as a Let's Play, but as an uncommentated long play of my entire playthrough of the game, in case people need Xenogears footage for something. So, that's what that's for, and until next time, this is Luxon, signing off.